So the whole idea in ETC that's really important for you guys to understand is that by moving these electrons from one molecule to another, we're taking little bits of energy at a time, and we're just going to do very small amounts of work with those little bits of energy. But when we accumulate enough little bits over the entire electron transport chain throughout the entire process, we end up with a substantial amount of energy in the form of a gradient that we can use to make lots and lots of ATP. So we're doing all this work in the mitochondria, right? The mitochondria have all of these folds. This is what we call the cristae of the mitochondria. This allows for lots and lots of copies of ETC to be operating in any given mitochondria at any given time. And most of the molecules we're going to talk about in the following slides that are doing the actual work, that are transferring these electrons and pumping protons across the membrane, are proteins, right? Proteins and their 1,000 jobs. This is another case of proteins and their 1,000 jobs, right? So here we have, I have a different picture of these as well, but here we have the basic outline of the process, right? In the matrix, we have Krebs turning, citric acid cycle turning. That's loading up our NADs and FADs. They have electrons on board, they're reduced. They're going to travel to these protons in the ETC, and we're going to oxidize them. Once they're oxidized, those electrons are gone. We replenish, then, the oxidized versions of NAD and FAD to go back to Krebs, citric acid cycle, and pick up more electrons so that the process can continue, right? Something you may not have appreciated. What happens if we don't have NAD and FAD coming? We can't transport electrons, right? What if NAD and FAD can't offload their electrons? Then they can't pick up any more electrons, and the whole thing stops, right? So even though they're disconnected cycles, they are dependent on one another, right? We need to load up the electrons on NAD and FAD in Krebs, and we need to also be able to offload them in ETC. If either one of those things can't happen, the whole process stops going. All right, so just recalling, every time an electron moves, if it's moving from a higher energy molecule to a lower energy molecule, energy can't be created or destroyed, it's got to go somewhere, right? Laws of thermodynamics. We're going to use that energy in little tiny bits. In addition, when we're taking these electrons off NAD and FAD, they're also releasing protons, H+ ions, and we looked at the periodic table the other day, recall. And hydrogen that's lost its electron is just a proton, right? So H+ are just protons, and we're going to pump those. What does it say to you that I'm using the word pump? What kind of transport is that going to be? Active, right? We're doing work. Finally, at the very end, why we need oxygen? We need oxygen. At the very end of this process, half of molar oxygen, which is just an O atom, is going to react with some electrons and some H+ ions to form water. There's those protons that we're making and the electrons, and here's the reaction that makes water at the end. We're going to reduce oxygen, regained, to make water. All right, so here's our picture of ETC, the big one. Every time a NAD or a FAD offloads electrons, we also produce protons. We're going to use the little bit of energy from these electrons jumping to pump protons across the membrane. You can see what's happening there is we're ending up with a lot of protons up here. Way more than we have on the other side of the membrane. Right? This is our gradient. This is what's going to make ATP for us. I know. I've been teasing. We're going to get there today. And then finally, you can see at the very end, we're going to reduce oxygen to form water. So we say that oxygen is the final electron acceptor. No oxygen, we can't accept this electron, which means it can't jump, right? So just like no NAD and FAD being regenerated through citric acid cycle and having their electrons offloaded, no oxygen present, none of the electrons can jump. They have no lower energy state to get to if oxygen isn't present. So no oxygen, the whole thing stops. We have lots of ways to stop this. So why does this all work? This has to do with the energy level of the proteins involved. These are all of the proteins involved in the electron transport chain. NAD and FAD come in reduced. They give their electrons to the next protein down the chain, reducing it and oxidizing themselves. And this continues down the line all the way to oxygen. So now we have a huge concentration gradient in the inner membrane space. We've used all our little bits of energy to pump all those protons across the membrane. It's just like having water collected behind a dam now, right? Or charges separated in a battery. This is actual energy that's available now to do real work. Not just little bits anymore. We can do big work. This is potential energy. You're going to see in a minute, we're going to use this to do mechanical work. There it is. That's what the whole thing is for. Just to get those hydrogens up there. Those protons. So here we have what I think is one of the coolest proteins on Earth. This is ATP synthase. So a lot of folks will see these videos and say, this is magic. How could this have possibly happened? This thing is too perfect. It's not too perfect, right? We're only 34% efficient in terms of our utilization of glucose. The rest is lost. Cars are 23%, right? So these are built things. These are things that are well within the range of what you could expect for built things to be. Recall, Mother Nature had billions of years to quote unquote build this, right? If you had a billion years of trial and error, you just might discover some protein by random chance that does this, especially if the selective pressure is high. If you need more energy and that gives you a benefit, then the advantage, if you happen to randomly discover this protein, randomly make it in your cell, would be huge.
Can you go over saturated?
Sure, conveniently I have it right here. So, when we're talking about saturated, we're referring to hydrogens on the molecule, hydrogens that can fit. Remember, a carbon can make 4 bonds. If it has all 4 hydrogens, we say that that's saturated, okay? So the same thing applies to fatty acids. If they're all single bonds, that means that all the hydrogens that can possibly fit in the molecule are there. That's saturated. If they have even 1 double bond, that means we're robbed of hydrogens. We have a spot where hydrogens could be, but they're not. This 1 double bond makes it unsaturated. And when we built them in lab, you could see how the ones that were saturated were fairly straight. And the ones that were unsaturated that had a double bond were bent. And we even tried to pack them together, and we couldn't because of those kinks. Because of these double bonds, they won't line up next to each other straight. So unsaturated fats are oiled, right? They're liquid at room temperature.
And then you said that they can artificially unsaturate it by adding a double bond.
They saturate them. Hydrogenated oils are oils that have had extra hydrogens pumped in and
so
broken in.
They can't unsaturate it? Or
They probably could, but they don't.
Sorry, I just mixed it up in my brain.
It's how we get margarine. Margarine is solid oil. It's a hydrogenated oil. So if it has one or more double bonds, it only takes one. That's unsaturated. No double bonds, saturated. And these are facts.
So what's the difference between monounsaturated and polyunsaturated?
So mono is one double bond. I can make it a polyunsaturated by just adding more than one. So it's referring to the number of double bonds. Monounsaturated is one, poly more than one. Good questions, guys.